Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another special cyber edition of Arkansas Week. For several weeks now, Arkansas has been a homeschooling state, and it will remain so for at least the balance of this semester. The coronavirus closure of our public schools has meant that hundreds of thousands of Arkansas pupils in grades pre-K through senior high have been compelled to continue their education at home using resources provided by the Arkansas Department of Education and this network, Arkansas PBS. The results thus far, say the experts, have been mixed. We'll talk with two of those experts about that in just a moment, a little bit later in the broadcast. But first, the struggles of small business and small governments in Arkansas to stay alive amid the pandemic. A familiar name to most Arkansans, One of Us, is helping launch a nonprofit program to help. James Lee Witt won praise as President Clinton's director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He's now a consultant and lobbyist, and he joins us remotely now. Mr. Witt, thanks very much for coming in, making yourself available. Tell us about this program. Exactly how is it going to work, and for whom is it intended to work?
Well, thanks for having us on, Steve, and good to see you again. It's a program that was started by John Harsh. It's called 202, and this is a website if people want to go to the website, 202works.com/COVID-19-help. And the purpose of this is there's several co-chairs on this website, and what our goal is to be able to help small businesses and cities and counties and entrepreneurs that are having problems being able to reopen, being able to access different funds that they might need to reopen for them and their employees. And we just want to help, and we want to help the small businesses and communities to get back on their feet economically. And there's a list of co-chairs on the website that I think you'll be impressed with that is offering pro bono help to help these communities and businesses. You know, when I was director of FEMA, we responded to 340 presidential disasters in 8 years. And what was really tough was after the major disasters, with SBA and FEMA, we did a study that showed 40% of small businesses that were affected by a natural disaster never reopened. And I think we're going to see a higher percentage of small businesses not reopen after this virus pandemic. And that's what we're concerned about. And that's why we're doing this.
Okay, so basically you would be what? Help me here, a navigational aid, navigational assistance in terms of small business, city, county governments, and fighting the bureaucracy.
Exactly. And the experts that's part of this program varies from legal as well as economic. And we can give them free advice in how to maneuver all of the different programs that they will need to get started back.
Tell us who is eligible for this assistance now.
Well, any small business or community that is having problems and are concerned about keeping their business open or their communities functioning, even hospitals, we can be helpful there. We've been doing a lot of, we started out with UAMS here in Little Rock, helping them. They call us getting PPEs for their hospital to protect the nurses and the doctors and the patients. And it just grew from there. And I got a call from New York at a daycare center that was, they were open, taking care of the doctors and nurses and firefighters and police officers' kids while they were on the job. And they needed 300 laser thermometers. And so Tyson called and needed laser thermometers. So I put my personal money up, $130,000, to get these laser thermometers over here so that we could help them. And we did finally get all of them in yesterday.
Well, what is there going to be a fee, a charge now to small businesses, governments, a consulting fee, or how's this going to work?
No, it's all pro bono. We just want to help.
What do they need to do, Mr. Witt?
Go to the website, take a look at the website, and they'll see how they can communicate with us. It can either be by phone or email or whichever works best.
You were in one of the toughest positions in the federal government during your time in government at the national level, I mean, in Washington. How would you compare this coronavirus epidemic, pandemic, to, say, Katrina or to other disasters that you were a part of addressing?
Well, you know, it's a natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina, which, you know, we helped them for 10 years down there on that recovery. But a natural disaster, you know, you can see what caused it. You know what you can do afterwards to rebuild. This is different. You can't see this. And the amount of lives lost today in our country is staggering. And we just have to do better. And, you know, it was interesting when the bombing of Murray building in Oklahoma City that we responded to, uh, it was unbelievable at that time in our country that some individual would do that. And so the grief was much harder because some individual did it. But if it's a tornado or a hurricane or a flood, you know, you knew the elements, you knew what was happening. And this is kind of like uh, this virus is something that you can't get a hold of, you can't see it, you can't grasp it, and there's just an awful lot of grief from it. And we need to make sure our country is safer and make sure that we can help these communities recover as much as possible.
I am compelled to ask. We've had complaints from, all of us have heard from many governors of both parties, many mayors of both parties, complain about the interplay of state and federal governments during this crisis. Could I have your assessment of it?
Well, you know, if I had been there, I would advise the president to use DOD and Corps of Engineers and FEMA and put in a supply chain that would had the advantage to and the ability to bring all of the things in to help support the states and local governments. You know, test kits, masks, gloves, gowns, everything. I'd have had a national supply chain where that every state would not be competing against each other, or hospitals wouldn't be competing against the state to purchase this equipment in these tests. And if that one supply chain had been there, then I think because you've got the federal government bidding against states for these supplies, and you know that's just not right. And so I think that now they have put the supply chain management now under DOD, and I think that's a good move.
Department of Defense. James
Yes.
Lee Witt, thank you. Thank you very much for your time and all success to you.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having us.
And we'll be right back. And we're back now, and the subject is public education. COVID-19 has given an entirely new meaning to the term private schooling, homeschooling. Almost 500,000 Arkansas youngsters who were in public classrooms, pre-K through 12, are now being homeschooled. And when it was announced several weeks ago by the governor that there would be no more on-site learning in public classrooms anyway for the balance of this semester, Mr. Hutchinson and State Education Secretary Johnny Key acknowledged that this was not necessarily the best scenario, but the best that could be managed. Since that time, the State Department of Education and this network, PBS Arkansas, have been providing materials and instructional programming through the day, indeed via the internet at all hours, to assist parents and other caregivers in continuing the education of their children, particularly in the earliest grades. So we wanted to check in and see how that's working. Joining us, Dr. Richard Abernathy is the Executive Director of the Arkansas Association of School Administrators. And Stacy Smith returns. She's Assistant Commissioner of the State Education Department for Learning Services. Dr. Abernathy, let's begin with you. You're in constant contact with superintendents across the state. How's this situation developing? How's it evolving? How's it working?
Well, I tell you, when the governor first announced that, it was kind of panic mode for schools and parents as well, all across the state. Um, and where the instruction started back in March or right after spring break with online learning to where we are now is dramatically different. We had schools out there that did not have any substantial plans in place, and we had other schools that had were really ready to move forward with this. But it's been quite a bit of an adjustment for administrators, for teachers, for students, for parents, and we have grown a lot through this ordeal, and hopefully we'll not be back in the situation, but at the same time, I think we'll be better off with online instruction moving forward as well.
Well, Secretary Key, indeed the governor as well, Dr. Abernathy, indicated, acknowledged very candidly that some districts, some students are going to fall through the cracks. Has that been your experience? Are you seeing that?
Yes, sir. Unfortunately, we have. We have seen students that in schools that were prepared, they really didn't miss a beat because some of them were taking online courses anyway, or some type of blended approach of taking online courses, and so they were just able to pick up and just keep moving forward. We have other schools out there that once school was dismissed, students did not have access to internet. They did not have access to devices. Schools were trying to deliver and still are trying to deliver paper copies to those parents where they would pick up either on site or at school or have them delivered at home. But quite honestly, we have some kids that did not receive any educational services since schools closed, either for a variety of reasons. In other schools, other kids have, like I said, they've not missed a beat, and we have a wide range in between. But we certainly have found the winners and losers when it comes to access to broadband, as well as devices at home.
Stacy Smith, any of this surprising to you?
No, I mean, we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing schools that had a much better plan in the beginning, and we're already using technology in a way to deliver instruction daily. And those schools have been able to, those schools that did not have any type of platform set up or were not using digital technology, they've struggled a little bit, and they've had some learning. They've had a learning curve, and we've seen that. And I don't know that we can even point to one group of students that were missing. I was talking to an assistant superintendent this last week, and he said, you would think it's a particular group or kids who don't have access. And he said, but we can look at our entire student body population and kids who have all the benefits and accessories and have the internet at home. Some of them are not engaged. And then we can look over here on this other end and see kids that we think they might not be engaged, but they are fully engaged. And so there's not just one typical kid that's being missed, or one typical kid that's fully engaged. I think it really depends a lot on what's going on in individual homes right now and family situation. But I will say that our schools, our superintendents and our teachers really have stepped up, and it's about access and how do students access the education, the general education that's being delivered. And they have gotten creative. And, we talked about the paper packets. We've talked about the PBS programming. We've talked about digital manners and venues that are out there right now. So people are getting innovative, and they're figuring out how do we reach those kids who have disengaged and how do we pull them back in.
What I'm hearing from both of you, Dr. Abernathy, Stacy Smith, is there are two principal factors, though. One is broadband access, and the other is parental involvement. Or am I correct there?
You're right on target.
Drivers. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're right on target.
parent engagement right now is key. It is absolutely key, and to be able to pull in and really listen to parents and listen to their what's going on. Encourage districts to do surveys to kind of check the pulse of what's going on in their communities and what individual families need to be able to support. The individual parent to become the teacher. The school should still be providing some type of education, and the teachers are still working all across the state, and they're working many, many hours. I know. I think some people think, oh, teachers are, unplugged. Kids aren't at school, and that is simply just not true. If parents are struggling, they need to reach out to their school and ask for assistance.
All right, Dr. Abernathy.
I agree completely. It is never more evident than now that parents are, in fact, the child's number one teacher. And those parents who are not engaged, that's about the educational services their child is getting. And Stacy mentioned about, it's not just one segment of kids. If I didn't have access to internet or broadband, then I don't receive any education. And that's not necessarily true. Those parents are making sure that they're getting the paper package, they're following up with the lessons, they're turning their work in. So it really comes down to the parents and making sure that their child is engaged. I've had superintendents and administrators and principals tell me that they are in fact reaching out to those kids that they've not heard from. They're driving out to their houses to see if there's any issues or checking up on their actual welfare of the kids as well. But getting parents to make sure their children are engaged in the educational process has been kind of overwhelming task in many cases.
A digital environment, a digital world we're living in, and yet here's a part of the problem, it would appear, and we have a map I think that viewers might find instructive. In terms of broadband internet access in Arkansas, we aren't where anybody really wants us to be. There are wide sections of the state that have limited access or absolutely none. And that makes everything that Arkansas PBS is trying to do in terms of augmenting uh, printed instruction materials from the state education department or local school district makes it extremely difficult. Uh, that adds to the burden that households, that parents are encountering.
You're absolutely right. And you may remember a conversation several years ago that we've had with providers and schools and in the state trying to make sure their schools had adequate broadband. And we really ran up against a brick wall. But then Governor Hutchinson came in and developed a committee and was actually able to expand broadband services to our school districts in our school buildings, let's say, and made that a reality. And that's really improved the capacity at our school buildings. But now with this, we're seeing it needs to be beyond the school buildings. We need to get broadband services out to households, out to communities where they can access it. So I think schools are adequately done. I know schools, since this has started, they've expanded their Wi-Fi services to make sure their parking lots will be hotspots of their particular communities, and that has helped. But we still need to get the broadband services out to individual households.
Stacy Smith?
Yeah, I would agree with what Dr. Abernathy said. I mean, I feel like we have the schools covered right now, and we have seen schools taking on that community effort to be able to do the parking lot pieces, and community churches and things like that really coming together to say, hey, we don't have adequate services throughout our entire community, but we have pinpointed some locations in our community in which access is available. But again, it's a bigger discussion, involves lots of other parties when you're talking about the as a state. But as far as our schools go and being able to deliver some type of instruction digitally, it's not perfect. And again, it goes back to that conversation of what does asynchronous instruction look like versus synchronous. If we can pre-record and provide instruction that way where kids can maybe come into the parking lot and download information. A lot of our schools have gone to one-to-one devices, and they're providing those for students. But it takes some outside of the box thinking and some innovators to get this done.
Assuming that classes resume or that instruction will resume in August, what are we likely to see, Stacy Smith? Can we assess how much? How long will it take us to assess what has been lost owing to this virus?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of that formative assessment piece that is so important for teachers, schools, to be able to know exactly what it is they want students to know and be able to quickly determine whether or not they know it and be able to fill that gap. So, what is most important for schools right now is for them to really drill down on what are the most important things that kids need to know to be successful beginning a new year, and then assessing for that, and then quickly learning how do you fill that gap. There will be some loss, but our staff and our teachers are highly trained.
Dr. Abernathy.
I agree with that as well. We know for a fact that we have some schools and some students that have lost a lot of instruction in the last several weeks and will continue, and they're going to be behind. There's no doubt about it. With the CARES funding, that's going to be able to provide some remediation after school programs, maybe some late summer school programs. So our administrators right now are working to figure exactly what does that look like. And let's just assume that we're going to come back with kids back in the traditional classroom, and we can have face-to-face instruction. The one thing that we're encouraging is do not lose what we have learned with digital learning, and maybe work that in their school year somewhere, because this may come back again. And if it does, we don't want to lose what we've already gained. But we know we have gaps that we need to fill. There's definitely going to have to be some remediation for students at the first of the year to try to get them caught up. But we have in fact lost instructional time for many of our students.
Well, here comes a medical question because Dr. Fauci, the legendary Dr. Fauci, brought it up himself just the other day. There is no way to avoid an autumn recurrence or a late year recurrence of this virus or a similar one, or worst case scenario, perhaps two different strains of virus. The implications on that for that, Dr. Abernathy, are just staggering, it would seem.
It really is, and we've been talking to administrators about you need to plan for multiple scenarios. Uh, One scenario is that we come back in the fall, we hit traditional school as we've always had it. We're going to have football, we're going to have volleyball, we're going to have all the activities going with it. That'd be the best case scenario. You start backing that up. All right, we maintain social distancing in the fall. What does that look like? What do spreading your desk out in the classrooms look like? What do feeding kids in the classroom look like versus the cafeteria? How are you going to transport kids if social distancing is still part of that? And then the last case is how do we continue instructional digital instruction if we don't come back to school? And what are we going to do with those kids that don't have access to broadband and they and their parents are not engaged in instruction right now? How do we reach those kids? So they're looking at all kinds of scenarios right now. And of course, right now, no one knows what the fall will look like. But I do think when you consider the national experts that we can expect some type of resurgence, hopefully not as long, but that is very likely this fall or this winter.
Stacy Smith, any advice for those parents who truly want to do the best for their kids, but it's the end of the day, maybe one, maybe two parents are working, they come home and they are exhausted, and there is the burden of schoolwork, and they're just emotionally overwhelmed by it all. How, any words of wisdom?
Um, well, one, be a parent first. Take care of health and safety and the emotional status of your family and your kids and yourself. You don't do anybody any good if you're burnt out. Read, read. And in doubt of what to do, read. If you're struggling with a particular lesson or being able to assist and not sure of the content, please do not feel like you have to do that on your own. Reach out to your local school, reach out and tell them you need help and that you just can't do that. And they're wanting to work with you. I think everybody, as this has gone on and the time has gone on, they recognize that everyone's in different places and every home different place. Flexibility has been given. So parents be parents first.
All right, Dr. Abernathy, we'll give you the last word.
No, I agree with that. Parents, they're stressed. And you look at some of their job placement. They've been displaced, they may be unemployed, but their lives have changed dramatically. That stress translates down to kids as well. and then you add on parents trying to teach kids lessons at home that they're not accustomed to teaching. I've had several parents tell me that they didn't really realize what all their kids were doing in school, and so they've had an eye opening with that as well. I guess my last parting shot would be, we have realized, I hope we've realized as a nation and as a state that broadband is no longer uh, where we can't have it. It is a utility and should be considered a utility just like electricity. And we have to make our broadband available for more citizens than what we have now. I don't know what that looks like. I know there's some infrastructure funding coming at the federal level, but we need to spend it wisely and we need to make broadband available to as many Arkansas citizens as possible.
And with that, we're simply out of time. Dr. Abernathy, Stacy Smith, as always, we thank you for your involvement, your participation, your help. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in for another remote edition of Arkansas Week, and we will see you next week.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR FM 89.